The Bigfoot chained inside that rock enclosure wasn't supposed to be real, but there it was, shackled to the mountain wall, exhaling slow plumes of fog into the freezing November air, watching me with the same hollow, depleted eyes I'd seen on men who'd spent years in captivity. Nobody warned me I'd be standing guard over something pulled out of legend, something the world insisted didn't exist, and yet was breathing right in front of me. My name is Dennis Harker. I'm 57 years old, and I spent 19 years in the Marines before a training accident outside Camp Pendleton sent me home with a shattered hip and a head full of things I'd rather not revisit. Since 1994, I've been living on a piece of property outside Packwood, Washington, picking up private security contracts for timber companies and the occasional off-the-books arrangement that pays well enough not to ask too many questions. Out here in the shadow of the Cascades, the forest doesn't judge you, and the silence has a way of filling in the spaces left by everything you lost. It was November 2001 when the call came. I was patching fence line on the back of my property when my pager buzzed. Unknown number, out-of-state area code. I went inside, poured a cup of black coffee, and dialed back on the landline. Mr. Harker, clipped voice, northeastern accent, someone used to being listened to. My name is Dr. Alan Forsyth. I'm reaching out on behalf of Meridian Biosciences. Your name came to us through a referral. We have a field security position opening, remote location, highly specialized. I took a sip of coffee. I don't do corporate work anymore. This isn't corporate in the traditional sense, it's field work, isolated terrain, 2 weeks minimum. The compensation is $14,000, cash, paid in 2 installments. I set the mug down. $14,000 was close to what I cleared in 5 months of fence mending and odd jobs. What am I guarding? A biological specimen in temporary containment. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You work alone, and you don't inquire about the nature of what you're securing. You have combat experience, you know the Cascade backcountry, and you're capable of maintaining confidentiality. That's the profile we need. I looked at the water stains spreading across my kitchen ceiling, the truck outside with the cracked radiator, the propane gauge sitting near empty with winter coming in fast. Location and start date? I asked. Approximately 38 miles northeast of your property. A courier will deliver your contract and site materials tomorrow morning. If you accept, be at the coordinates by 0700 on November 12th. Come alone. Bring your service weapon. He disconnected without another word. The courier arrived at 6:40 the next morning in a grey Subaru with no plates I could read. He handed a manila envelope through the cracked window and was back on the road before I'd opened it. Inside, a non-disclosure agreement, dense with legal language, a laminated topographic map with a red circle marked in the high country northeast of Randall, a cashier's check for $4,000, and a single typed instruction sheet. Guard a biological specimen in containment. Observe and log. Maintain radio silence except for scheduled check-ins or genuine emergency. Minimum 2-week assignment. I told myself it was a protected species they'd caught and didn't want publicized. Some endangered predator they were studying. I told myself a lot of things while I cashed the check and packed my truck. On November 12th, I loaded my old Chevy with 2 weeks of gear, cold weather clothing, my M9, 4 boxes of ammunition, a field medical kit, and a paperback novel I never ended up opening. The drive took me deep into logging roads that dead-ended in clear cuts, then into Forest Service tracks that turned to mud 2 tracks, then into terrain I had to navigate by the map alone. Waylon Jennings played low on the tape deck, while the tree canopy closed overhead and the light turned grey and cathedral. The road ended at a wide spot between 2 massive firs. A white cargo van and a dark green Jeep were already parked there. I stepped out into air that was cold enough to hurt and thin enough to notice. We were high up. The ridgelines above were dusted with early snow. A man in his late 40s appeared from behind a boulder formation. Fleece jacket, trail boots, wire-rimmed glasses. He had the look of a researcher who'd bought outdoor gear specifically for this assignment. Harker, that's me. Dr. Forsyth, follow me. We walked a narrow track between rock outcroppings for about 60 yards before the trail opened onto a natural ledge cut into the mountainside. And that's when I stopped walking. Someone had found a natural alcove in the cliff face, maybe 25 feet deep and 18 feet wide, like a shallow cave that had never finished forming. The opening had been sealed with a heavy steel frame, industrial bars anchored into the rock with lag bolts the diameter of my thumb. Heavy-gauge chains ran from rings drilled into the alcove walls and ended in cuffs. The floor was bare stone and compacted earth, covered in scattered straw, and in the back of that alcove, sitting with its knees drawn up, was something I have no clean way to describe. It was enormous even seated. I estimated 7 feet tall in that hunched posture, maybe more standing. Dark brown hair covered its body in layers, matted along the sides with mud and what looked like dried blood. The arms were long, the shoulders almost improbably wide. But it was the face that stopped my breathing. Not a bear, not anything I had a category for. The face was broad and flat, almost human in its proportions, with a heavy ridge of bone over the eyes and a jaw that suggested structural strength beyond anything in the primate literature I'd skimmed in college biology. A fresh wound on its right shoulder had been wrapped in gauze that was badly soaked through, and it was looking at me. Not with the unfocused wariness of an animal, with attention, direct, measuring, patient attention. "My God," I said quietly. "Officially it doesn't exist," Forsyth said, his voice dropping. "We recovered it 3 weeks ago from a highway incident on Route 12. A logging truck driver called it in as a bear strike. When the company's response team arrived, they found this instead. We secured the site before anyone else had access." I couldn't look away from it. The creature watched me with the same fixed focus I was giving it. "You're telling me this is a Sasquatch? We call it Subject 4. Genetically, it's neither human nor any known primate, something in between or something adjacent to both. A relict population that's managed to avoid documentation for an indeterminate period. Standing, it's approximately 8 feet. Muscle mass is extraordinary. The scars you can see through the hair are old. This animal has had a long, hard existence. I could see through the bars to the forest below the ridge, open sky, moving clouds. The creature could smell the trees from where it sat, could probably hear the creek I'd crossed a half-mile back. "Your assignment is straightforward," Forsyth continued. 24-hour observation. We have a base camp over that ridgeline 50 meters out. You feed it twice daily from the cooler. Vegetation, fruit, raw protein. You log its condition and behavior. You radio in every 3 days. If health deteriorates significantly, you call immediately. Do not enter the containment area. Do not attempt direct communication. Just watch and record. What happens to it when your research team arrives? Not your concern, Mr. Harker. Your concern is keeping it alive and secured for 14 days. The creature shifted against the back wall, adjusting its position with a grimace that tracked clearly to the bandaged shoulder. Pain. Conscious, expressed, recognizable pain. "I can handle it," I said. Forsyth walked me to the camp. A large canvas tent with a wood stove, a folding cot, a work table with monitoring equipment and a two-way radio, a cooler with food for me and for it, a water cache from a nearby spring runoff, and a logbook with previous entries in Forsyth's precise handwriting. Radio contact every 72 hours. There's a storm system moving in from the coast later this week. The alcove overhang should provide adequate shelter for the specimen. The chains allow about 6 feet of movement. He paused. Questions? I had about 40 of them. I asked none of them. 2 other men loaded the remaining equipment into the van. Then all 3 vehicles left. I listened to the engines fade until there was nothing but wind moving through the high rocks and the distant sound of a raven working the updrafts somewhere below the ridge. I was alone. I spent the first morning organizing the camp and testing the radio. At noon, I loaded the first feeding into the canvas supply bag, apples, a head of cabbage, carrots, a section of raw venison from the cooler, and hiked back to the containment site. The creature hadn't moved from its position against the back wall. The wind through the bars moved the hair along its arms. Those dark eyes found me the moment I came into sight and didn't let go. I stopped 10 feet from the frame. I'm going to push this through the bottom gap, I said. Just food, nothing else. I knelt and slid the bag through the narrow space between the steel base and the rock floor, then stepped back and straightened up. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the creature rose. Even having studied it for the past hour from camp with binoculars, the full height of it moving upright was something my nervous system wasn't prepared for. It filled the alcove top to bottom. It moved toward the food with a slight hitch in its gait that favored the injured shoulder, the chains shifting and chinking softly with each step. It reached down, pulled out an apple with fingers that were long and articulated and unmistakably dexterous, and brought it close to examine it. Then it bit through the skin with a clean crack that echoed off the rock walls. I stood in the cold wind and watched this impossible thing eat with something close to table manners, examining each item before consuming it, setting aside the cabbage to eat last, drinking from the metal water dish in the corner with deliberate, unhurried sips. When it finished, it returned to its position at the back of the alcove. And then it did something that knocked the remaining air out of my lungs. It looked directly at me and nodded once. Slow, intentional, unmistakable. I took 3 steps backward without deciding to. My boot heel caught a loose stone and I almost went down. That was not instinct. That was not a conditioned reflex. That was acknowledgement. I walked back to camp and sat in front of the wood stove for a long time without lighting it. 3 nights in, the storm came. I'd been watching it build all day from the west, grey-green clouds stacking up behind the ridge, the temperature dropping 8 degrees in 2 hours. By 9 in the evening, the wind was driving sleet horizontally through the tent seams, and the temperature had fallen well below freezing. I couldn't sleep. I lay on the cot and listened to the storm work the canvas and thought about the creature chained to a rock in an open-faced alcove with a suppurating shoulder wound and a layer of wet hay between itself and the stone floor. At 11:30, I got up, pulled on every layer I had, and hiked back through the sleet with a flashlight. The beam caught the steel frame first, then swept into the alcove. The creature was pressed into the furthest corner the chains allowed, knees drawn up, hair matted flat with rain and ice. The shoulder bandage was gone, apparently torn away by the weather or its own movement. The wound underneath was visible even from outside the bars, red and swollen at the edges, in a way that had nothing to do with normal healing. It looked up at me. In its eyes was something I recognized from field hospitals and from the faces of men I'd tried to help in situations where my help wasn't enough. It was enduring, not resisting, not fighting, simply enduring, because there was no other option available. I stood in the sleet for a long time, then I went back to camp and got the spare wool blanket off the shelf above my cot. Threading it through the bars in sections took 10 minutes in the dark with frozen fingers. The creature waited without moving while I worked it through fold by fold, then took the fabric with both hands and drew it around its shoulders with a kind of careful deliberateness that stopped me. It wasn't just wrapping up, it was handling it with awareness, with intention. It made a sound then, low and resonant, that came up through the rock under my feet as much as through the air. "You're welcome," I said, and heard how strange my own voice sounded in the storm. I went back the next morning with the first aid kit. The infection had advanced overnight. The wound needed cleaning, and it needed antibiotics I didn't have, but I could at least do something about the contamination risk. "I want to treat that shoulder," I said, standing outside the bars. "I'm not coming in, but if you put your arm through the gap, I can clean it and dress it properly." The creature looked at me for a long moment. Then it moved to the bars, chains shifting, and pushed its right arm through the gap as far as the cuff would allow. Up close, without glass or distance between us, the details were overwhelming. The skin under the hair was grey-brown, the texture of it visible in the places where the hair was thinner. The hand at the end of that arm had 5 fingers. The nails were flat, not clawed. The knuckles were pronounced, and the palm was broad, but the structure was not far removed from human architecture. I cleaned the wound with antiseptic. The creature's breathing went fast and shallow, and it gripped the steel bar with its free hand until the metal popped and shifted slightly in its anchor, but it didn't pull away and it didn't make a sound. I packed the wound as well as I could and wrapped it in clean gauze. The creature withdrew its arm slowly, looked at the bandage, then looked at me. Then it placed one massive hand flat against its own chest and dipped its head forward, a single, slow degree. I walked back to camp. I went inside the tent and sat on the cot, and I understood with complete certainty that I was not guarding an animal. I started writing honest entries in my personal notebook, separate from the official log. The official log got what Forsyth wanted: clinical observations, health metrics, behavioral notes stripped of any language that might raise questions. My notebook got the truth. Day 5. Subject demonstrated comprehension of spoken instruction. Extended injured limb for treatment upon verbal request. Post-treatment response indicates emotional awareness. This is not animal behavior. I tore that page out and burned it in the stove. That night, well past midnight, I heard footsteps outside the tent. Heavy, deliberate, the spacing of something bipedal and large. I came up off the cot with the M9 in my hand before I was fully awake. I unzipped the tent flap. The creature stood at the edge of the camp in the moonlight, a broken length of chain hanging from one wrist, the other end dragging on the frozen ground. It regarded me without alarm. I looked at the chain, at the wrist cuff, still intact, at the link where the chain had simply been pulled apart. "How long have you been able to do that?" I said. It held up 4 fingers, 4 days. It had been capable of walking out of that alcove since day 4 of my assignment and had chosen to stay. I lowered the pistol. "Why didn't you go?" The creature produced something from under its arm, the notebook and pencil I'd left near the bars 2 days ago, having thought nothing of it. It opened to a blank page and drew quickly. 2 figures, one tall, one shorter, a line connecting them. Below the line it wrote a single word in crude large letters: trust. I stared at the page. "You can write." It tapped the word with one finger. "You stayed because you trusted me to help you." A slow nod. I sat down on the cold ground outside the tent and the creature settled across from me, cross-legged, the broken chain coiled to one side, and we looked at each other in the moonlight for a long time. "Can you understand everything I say?" I asked. It nodded. "How old are you?" It opened both hands, closed them, opened them again, many times over. It shook its head at the impossibility of the number. "More than 100 years?" A nod. "More than 200? Another nod, and something in its expression that I read as rueful acknowledgement. "There are others like you." It held up both hands, then lowered 2 fingers slowly, with what I understood immediately as grief. "You lost too." It nodded. "Are there others still living?" It held up 3 fingers, pointed northeast, drew a rough line in the dirt indicating distance. "They're out there right now, waiting for you." The hand went to its chest, then it pointed at me and made a gesture I didn't recognize. A circular motion with both hands opening outward, the way ripples spread from a stone thrown into still water. I didn't understand it then. I would later. We stayed outside talking, in our imperfect way, until the eastern sky began to lighten. Then the creature walked back to the alcove and sat down inside the open gate as though it were a choice it was making fresh each time. Because it was. On the morning of the 10th day, I drove the 2 hours into Morton to get supplies and to use the payphone outside the hardware store. I called a wildlife rehabilitator I'd worked with during a mountain lion incident 3 years earlier. "Hypothetical," I said. "Large animal, infected wound, no access to veterinary care, several weeks without proper treatment. What's the infection risk?" "Sepsis," she said immediately. "Without broad-spectrum antibiotics, a deep wound infection in a large mammal can go systemic fast. You need amoxicillin if you can't get anything else. Fish antibiotics at the feed store will do in a pinch. Same compound." I bought every bottle of fish mox that Heller's Farm Supply had on the shelf. Back at the containment site that evening, I showed the creature the bottles and mimed swallowing. It held out its palm. I placed 2 capsules in it. It turned them over, sniffed them, looked at me for a long moment, then threw them back without hesitation. Trust again. The night before Forsyth's team was scheduled to arrive, the creature and I sat together outside the tent after dark, and I laid out everything I'd been working through for the past 4 days. "They're coming tomorrow morning," I said. "If they find you here alive and healthy, they take you to a facility. You never see those mountains again. You never see the 3 who are waiting." The creature watched me. "I need you to be dead, on paper, In the log in the ashes I'm going to spread across that alcove floor, I need you to be something that didn't survive, so that they take their samples and their equipment and their money and leave, and we can walk out of here together. I'd spent 2 days on the preparations. I'd taken a deer the previous morning and burned the bones down in the fire pit until they were grey and fragmented. I'd taken official-looking photographs of the alcove at various stages. I'd written a log entry timed for 11:50 the previous night. Subject expired approximately 2340 hours. Cause of death consistent with septic shock secondary to shoulder wound. Subject showed increased respiratory distress, loss of motor coordination over preceding 6-hour period. Body cremated at 01:30 hours per Protocol 6, Class A biological hazard. Remains secured for transport. The creature listened to all of it. When I finished, it reached over and placed its hand over mine on the ground between us, held it for 3 seconds, and released. Deal. At 2 in the morning, I unlocked the padlocks, 3 of them heavy clicks in the mountain silence, and swung the barred section open. The creature stepped through. It stood outside the alcove for the first time in over a month and breathed. Just breathed. Head slightly back, eyes closed, the cold night air moving in and out of a chest the size of a rain barrel. Then it looked at me and pointed north. "Not yet," I said. "Thicket, 50 yards that direction. You go in deep, and you go silent. They'll do their sweep, take their samples and drive away, then we walk." It moved into the darkness without a sound and was simply gone, the forest accepting it back the way water accepts a stone. I scattered the ashes, arranged the charred bone fragments, burned the blankets for added organic smell, staged the photographs. By 3:30 in the morning, the alcove looked like the end of something. At 4:45, I heard engines on the logging road below. They were 90 minutes early. Forsyth came in with 5 people, including a grey-haired man named Calloway, who introduced himself as Meridian's Director of Field Operations and who had the specific, contained quality of someone who'd spent a career handling situations that couldn't be allowed to become problems. I walked them to the alcove. The morning light was just beginning to come over the eastern ridge. Forsyth stood at the opening and looked at the ashes and the bones and the burned blankets and the empty chains for a long time without speaking. "You cremated it," he said. "Protocol 6, Class A biological hazard, remote location, no means of proper preservation. The infection had gone systemic. I watched it decline over 6 hours. When it expired, I followed the protocol you gave me. That specimen," Forsyth said, and his voice had gone very flat, "represented an incalculable scientific value. That specimen was dying of an infected wound that predated my arrival by 3 weeks," I said. "If you want to assign responsibility for the loss, I'd start with whoever did the initial field dressing." Calloway stepped between us. "Dr. Forsyth, Mr. Harker followed the protocols as written. The specimen's deterioration began before his assignment." He looked at me. "Collect your samples. I'll debrief Mr. Harker." Calloway walked me to the far edge of the camp while Forsyth's team moved through the alcove with collection bags and evidence markers. "Walk me through the last 72 hours, Calloway said. I walked him through it. He asked clean, precise questions. He was good at his job and he was watching my face the whole time, which meant I watched my face too. Kept it tired, kept it flat, kept it carrying the particular weight of someone who'd watched something die and done the paperwork alone in the dark. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You made the call you were trained to make," he said. "These situations have a cost. That's why we pay the rate we do." He handed me an envelope. "The remaining 10,000 as agreed. Your NDA remains in full effect. This location doesn't exist. What you observed here is proprietary. Are we clear?" "Crystal," I said. By 7:30 they were loaded and moving back down the road. I stood in the clearing and watched the dust settle after the last vehicle disappeared into the trees. Then I turned toward the thicket to the north. "They're gone," I said, at normal speaking volume. "Let's go home." The creature emerged from the hemlock stand like a shadow becoming solid, unhurried, whole, scanning the clearing once before it fixed its gaze on me. We left within the hour. I packed for 3 days, water, dried food, the medical kit, the M9, a compass, and the laminated map. The creature carried the canvas bag with the notebook inside. Moving through that terrain with it beside me was one of the more disorienting experiences of my life. I was crashing through underbrush, tripping over root systems, working for every step on the steep pitches. It moved like the forest was built around it, each footfall placed without noise, its body reading the terrain the way a river reads a slope. It waited for me. Every time I fell behind on a climb or had to pick my way across a boulder field, it stopped and waited with the patience of something that measured time differently than I did. My hip, the bad one, the Gulf injury, was sending signals that ranged from insistent to threatening by early afternoon. The creature noticed before I said anything. It stopped and pointed at its own back. "I'm fine," I said. 20 minutes later, facing a 40-degree slope covered in loose scree, I reconsidered. The creature crouched. I climbed onto its back and felt it take my weight like I was a jacket it had picked up, and it went up that slope without breaking its rhythm. At the top, it set me down as carefully as you'd set down something fragile. "Thank you," I said. It pointed northeast. Close now. We dropped into a valley that didn't appear on any of my maps. Old-growth hemlock and cedar so dense that the canopy was nearly complete overhead, the light coming through in columns, the floor deep in moss and fallen needles undisturbed by any trail or footprint I could read. The air in that valley was different, not just colder, older somehow. The creature slowed, then stopped. It made a sound, low and complex, that carried in a way that seemed to go below hearing. From the trees ahead, 3 shapes emerged. They were distinct from each other, one taller with silver-streaked hair along the shoulders, one broader and darker with a healed scar crossing the upper chest, and one younger with auburn-brown fur and eyes that went immediately to the creature beside me with an intensity that needed no translation. They came together slowly, carefully, foreheads touching, hands moving across the healed shoulder, asking questions through contact. The sounds between them were layered and low, and I understood none of the content and all of the meaning. I stepped back and stood at the tree line and watched a family reconvene. After a time, the creature turned and gestured me forward. It pointed at me and made a series of gestures toward the others, the same gestures it had used in our makeshift vocabulary over the past 2 weeks. Friend, safe, kept the agreement. The eldest one, the silver-streaked one, moved toward me. Up close, its face carried age in every line and plane of it. These were not human years, but they were years, accumulated and recorded in the architecture of that face. It reached out one hand and placed a single finger against my jaw gently, the way you'd touch something to confirm it was real. Then it stepped back and made a gesture I'd never seen before. Both hands open and facing up, then turned slowly, face down. The creature beside me touched my shoulder. "Come," it meant. We walked further into the valley until we reached a place where a narrow waterfall dropped 30 feet off a rock shelf into a pool, and behind the waterfall, half concealed, a cave entrance wide enough for all of us. Inside, the cave opened into a chamber. Gaps in the ceiling let in columns of grey light, and on the walls, from floor to the reach of the tallest among them, were markings, not random, not abstract, pictographs, arranged chronologically, flowing from the oldest section of wall near the back, the pigment nearly faded to nothing, toward the entrance, where the most recent carvings were sharp and fresh. The eldest one walked me along the walls and showed me the story. The oldest images showed 2 kinds of beings sharing terrain. No conflict, separate orbits, trade sometimes depicted in the sharing of what looked like food and tools. Then the human figures multiplied, spread. The tall figures in the images began to move away from the human settlements, retreating to higher ground, deeper forest. Then the weapons appeared. Image after image, the tall figures running, falling, groups shrinking, families halved, then halved again. I counted the figures in the oldest images, 30 or more. In the middle sections, 15. In the most recent panels, before the one carved fresh at the end, 5. Then 2 crossed out, 3 remaining. The eldest one pointed to the newest carving. A human figure, smaller than the tall ones, standing between them and a group of human figures carrying what were clearly meant to be firearms. It pointed at that human figure and then at me. "That's me," I said. "You knew someone like me was coming." It touched the carving, then touched my chest, then made the gesture I'd first seen from the creature I freed, the circular motion expanding outward. I understood it this time. Not connection, legacy, the ripple moving outward from a single action. "You want me to keep protecting you," I said, "not just once. You want me to be the reason this valley stays unknown." The eldest one held out one hand. I took it. We ate together that evening inside the cave, sharing what I'd brought and what they offered from their own stores. The younger one, the auburn-haired one with the curious eyes, studied my jacket zipper for 20 minutes with the focused absorption of an engineer. The creature I'd freed sat beside me and drew in the notebook, the pencil moving steadily in the quiet. When it turned the page toward me, it had drawn the two of us, one tall, one shorter, standing side by side at the edge of the valley. Below the drawing, in the same heavy, careful letters as before, same. The moon was high when the creature walked me back to the cave entrance. We stood beside the waterfall in the cold, and I had the sensation of standing at a threshold between two worlds, one of them lit and mapped and full of people who would never believe any of this, and one of them right here, surviving in the dark on the far side of every road ever built. The creature reached into the canvas bag and pulled out the wool blanket, the first one I'd threaded through the bars on that sleeting night 2 weeks ago. It held it out to me. I took it. We shook hands. One last time, slow and firm, and I held on for a moment before letting go. It stepped back into the cave. I stood by the waterfall until I couldn't hear its footsteps over the water anymore. Then I started the long walk back. I was home in Packwood by the following evening. 3 months later, Meridian Biosciences quietly filed for a federal land use assessment on a section of the Gifford-Pinchot covering, among other areas, the watershed just west of where that valley lay. Their stated purpose was timber resource evaluation. The access road they proposed would have penetrated to within 4 miles of where I'd walked out of the trees. I filed an objection. Then I filed another. I contacted every conservation attorney who'd take a call from a retired Marine with no legal background and an obsessive interest in protecting a very specific drainage. I showed up at every public comment meeting. I became the person in the back of the room who always had one more question, one more procedural concern, one more citation from the environmental impact literature. Meridian's project manager left a message on my answering machine once, polite and thin-lipped. I didn't return it. The assessment was denied. The access road was never built. I've stopped 3 such projects in the years since: a hiking trail extension, a research station proposal, a backcountry permit expansion that would have brought guided tours within 2 ridgelines of the valley. People in Packwood think I'm an eccentric, a veteran with too much time and not enough perspective. I let them think it. The blanket sits folded on the shelf above my cot. I touch it sometimes when the work feels abstract, when I'm sitting in a public comment hearing for the 3rd consecutive week and starting to wonder why I'm there. Then I remember a creature that could have walked out of those bars on day 4 and chose not to. That sat in the rain for 3 weeks, waiting for the one human who'd decided to do the right thing. That shook my hand in a moonlit mountain clearing and left me with a wool blanket and a responsibility I never asked for and would not trade for anything. Late some nights I'd drive up into the high country and park at the end of the road and sit with the engine off and look at the dark shapes of the ridgelines against the sky. I don't call out. I don't go looking. That was never part of what we agreed. But sometimes in the interval between one sound and the next, in the particular quality of silence that exists just before the wind shifts, I feel the weight of being watched from somewhere I cannot see. And I understand that the watching means the watching back is being done from a distance that keeps them safe. That's enough. That has always been enough. I'm 57 years old and my hip is worse and my truck needs a new transmission, and I have spent the better part of 2 decades being the kind of nuisance that bureaucracies and corporations find expensive to ignore. Some people call it obsession. I call it a debt. What that creature showed me about humans was not something it said in any language I could transcribe. It showed me in the drawing on the cave wall, and in the fact that it had preserved those drawings at all, that we have always known what we are, We have always known that we expand until there is no room left for anything else. We have always known that we name what we don't understand as threat and treat what we can't control as resource. And sometimes the only honest response to knowing that about your own species is to stand in the way of it, as many times as it takes, in whatever room they let you into. So I keep standing there. The blanket is still on the shelf, the valley is still unknown, and somewhere past the end of the last road, past the edge of every map, a family is still walking.